Welcome back to the program where we discuss the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In our first segment, we are talking about the Hilful Fudul Pact, which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was part of, and we are talking about the lessons that we learn from here. My intention here is not to just recall the incidents from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and continue in that fashion, but rather to highlight those incidents and to take lessons from those incidents. So we've been doing so with all other incidents that we discussed up to this point, whether it was the splitting of the chest, whether it was the upbringing of the Prophet ﷺ in a particular fashion and design. So our objective here is to continuously learn from all these incidents that we discuss about the Prophet ﷺ. So coming back to the incident, the Prophet ﷺ was part of this Hilful Fudul. He was part of this agreement in order to protect the rights of the vulnerable. And oftentimes, it is the superpowers or the person with the muscle that is continuously oppressing the people that have no might or no power on their side. It happens on a global level, on a macro scale, and it also happens on a micro scale. Naturally, a person of power, a person with position, would dominate over a person who does not have the power or the authority on their side. And that is the nature of life by and large. The Prophet ﷺ said that this cannot continue in this way, and you've got to continue fighting and championing the cause of the vulnerable in society. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Unsur akhaka dhaliman aw madluma. Help your brother, whether he's the oppressor or the oppressed, which is the madlum. So the Sahaba asked, how do you help the oppressor? And he said, by helping him stop his oppression. And how do you help the madlum? By helping him come out of that oppression. So we know that the Prophet ﷺ was an active member of society from a very young age already. His participation in the Fijar wars that we just spoke about in the first segment, and now his participation in Hilful Fudul, the pact for the vulnerable ones. So I'm highlighting a point here and painting the picture that the Prophet ﷺ was not just a bystander in life. He saw things happening. He saw things happening around him and he just remained silent. This was not the approach of the Prophet ﷺ. Rather, to the contrary, wherever he could, render his support, he would do so. And this time around, he's giving his support for a noble cause. This got nothing to do with religion. At this stage, there's no Islam. At this stage, there is no Nubuwah. This is a young man getting involved in the structures of society to play an active role, which is highlighting to us that you and I have a very significant role to play in our communities also. And not everything is done on the basis of religion. Racism is racism that one needs to tackle. Poverty is something that one needs to tackle, irrespective of creed, ethnicity, and background. So we've got to form alliances on this. Imagine you standing up in a community where children are being abused. And we're not talking about the Muslim community, we're talking about the non-Muslim community. Imagine you go out and you express your concern and you show support to the cause which protects the rights of children. People will take this so positively that this person, despite not being from our community, is standing up for the rights of children. Obviously, that indirectly shines the light on your religion. That is dawah, subhanallah. I remember on many occasions, I'll just cite to you one of those occasions, I was told to speak on women's right And we know that in South Africa you have Women's Month, and you dedicate special days, and you dedicate special occasions to highlight the plight of the women and what they are suffering in society. So I was told to give the Islamic perspective and to speak about on this matter, and I presented the Islamic viewpoint. And one of the points I mentioned is that you got to show respect and regard for the woman in your life, irrespective whether she's your mother, daughter, wife, or sister, simply because Allah affords her the respect and the dignity and the honor. So you also supposed to show respect, dignity, and honor to that lady. Why? Because Allah does that. When I spoke about this after the press conference, there were many people who were present there, and they then took me, and engaged with me to say that they were very impressed by the stance of the Muslim faith on the issue of women. But I was not there as a Muslim representing my religion. It was just a dialogue on women. And I took that opportunity to speak about the positive aspect of our religion. And it became a means of da'wah for the people that were available. So my point here is that the Prophet ﷺ being part of this pact, Hilful Fudul, highlights the fact that we've got a very critical role to fulfill in our society. We got to be educating people about this. And we've got to be also giving our support on initiatives that stands for the right cause. For example, to stand against women abuse, to stand against children abuse, to stand against exploitation. And there are many central themes that we all subscribe to, irrespective of our creed, irrespective of our ethnicity. But my point is that when we stand up for these issues, then automatically the light is shone on our religion. And people say, wow, subhanallah, here is a man from another community faith, and he's standing up for our rights. And as a result, it opens up the beautiful religion to them. It exposes them to the religion. So this particular incident highlights the activism of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Nabi of Allah was not just a Nabi of Salah and Zakat and Hajj and Sawm, but rather he was also a Nabi that championed many causes. This is one of them, to the point that he said after Islam that if I was invited to another arrangement like the Hilful Fudul after Islam, I would have readily accepted and gone to be part of this arrangement. So this tells you of the noble initiatives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The other point to keep in mind here is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is growing up as an adult, and all these things are happening. Now, tied us up, him being a shepherd, him participating in the Fijar wars, not actively as a combat, but just helping with the arrows, and now the incident of Hilful Fudul. I want you to just think about how these events are going to shape him as an individual when he grows up and later on when he becomes a Nabi. Because you are basically the sum of your experiences of life. When you are exposed to these kind of settings already early on in life, when you become a leader, when you become the leader of your circle and your community, you draw on from these experiences of life. Subhanallah. Isn't this amazing? So from being a shepherd, he picked up leadership skills. Participating in the Fijar wars, he got exposure to the battlefield. And being part of the Hilful Fudul agreement, he is now learning on how to be an activist. So you can see how the grooming is taking place of the Prophet ﷺ. Another incident that is spoken about of the Prophet ﷺ is the marriage to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, and also the reconstruction of the Kaaba, and all of this is happening before the Prophet ﷺ becomes a Nabi. And maybe I can talk about the reconstruction of the Kaaba very briefly, and then in the next program we can talk about his marriage to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, because that warrants a program on its own. So we know that the Quraysh undertook the reconstruction of the Kaaba, and they said we will only use halal income and halal money for this project. And at that moment the Prophet ﷺ was still a young man, and he was not a Nabi as yet. He also participated in the rebuilding of the Kaaba. And so this is another significant event of his adulthood and the years before becoming the Nabi. In our next program, inshallah, we'll talk about his marriage to Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha.